Picture this, a bitterly cold December night in 1980. The streets of New York City buzzed with life, unaware that just outside the Grand Dakota building near Central Park, time was about to stand still. Lying on the pavement was John Lennon music. Legend, peace activist, and former Beatle, bleeding out from 4 gunshot wounds. His killer, Mark David Chapman, stood eerily calm nearby, holding a copy of The Catcher in the Rye as if that explained everything. And just steps away, Yoko Ono, John's partner in art, life, and love, had her world shattered forever. More than 40 years later, the pain of that night still clings to Yoko Ono like a shadow that refuses to leave. In every interview, when the conversation turns to John, her voice breaks. Her grief is not just sorrow, it's a daily companion. The man who helped define a generation with his music was stolen from her in a moment of violence that would echo across the world. For Yoko, that night wasn't just the end of a love story. It was the beginning of a lifelong struggle to live with an unfillable void. John and Yoko had never shied away from controversy. Their avant-garde art, public protests like the famous Bed In for Peace, and Lennon's departure from the Beatles had always kept them in the public eye. Through it all, Yoko stood by him, fierce, composed, and endlessly loyal. But no strength could prepare her for that night in December, when a man who once called himself a fan pulled the trigger and left her husband lifeless. Chapman claimed he was driven by delusions and a twisted need for notoriety. He said Lennon was a phony, too rich to preach peace. But for Yoko, these so-called reasons have always felt hollow. How could anyone believe they had the right to extinguish the light of a man whose only weapons were a guitar and a dream? In the years since, she's tried to understand the unimaginable, but some questions simply have no answers. Inside the Dakota, where they once built a life together, Yoko is haunted by memories. Every hallway, every window holds echoes of laughter and love that was stolen far too soon. She often speaks of the milestones John missed, the holidays, their son Sean growing up, the ordinary joys they once cherished. Her grief, she says, is like the ocean, vast, unpredictable, and sometimes too much to bear. Yet, even in that grief, Yoko has found ways to honor John's legacy. She poured her sorrow into art and activism, becoming a guardian of Lennon's message of peace. Each year in Iceland, she lights the Imagine Peace Tower, a glowing beam that pierces the dark sky on John's birthday. It's a symbol of resilience, of hope rising from heartbreak. Through the John Lennon Educational Tour Bus, she supports young artists and continues to share the message he once sang to the world. Still, the pain never truly fades. Living in the same apartment where their story ended, walking past the very spot where John fell, Yoko carries a burden most of us can't. Begin to imagine. She is the widow of John Lennon, and with that title comes both honor and an unbearable weight. In public, she is often seen as the keeper of his flame, but behind closed doors, she remains a woman navigating life without her soulmate. Even as Yoko preserves John's memory, the public hasn't always been kind. For decades, she's been unfairly blamed for the Beatles' breakup, cast as the outsider who pulled John away. And while she's fought back with grace and dignity, that narrative has taken a toll. To this day, she faces scrutiny not for what she did, but simply for who she was to John, a muse, a partner, an equal. The cruelest twist, Mark David Chapman is still alive. Yoko has opposed every parole hearing, arguing that his release would only deepen the wound. John was a man of peace, yes, but even Yoko admits that forgiveness in this case may be impossible. Yet she carries on. Her art, her presence, her strength, all serve as reminders that love doesn't end with death. In one installation, a shattered teacup is reassembled, symbolizing the broken yet unbreakable connection she still feels with John. In another, abstract expressions of loss paint the picture of a soul still reaching for the hand it once held. Nearly 92 years old, Yoko knows her time is limited, but every painting, every speech, every tribute is an act of resistance, defying the darkness that tried to silence their shared dream. She continues not only for herself, but for John, for Sean, and for the world they once believed they could change. Some days the grief threatens to pull her under. She has admitted to feeling as though she's living two lives, one for herself and one for John. And in those quiet moments, she returns to their old routines, sipping tea by the window, watching the snow fall over Central Park, listening for a voice that no longer speaks, but never stops echoing. "I still feel him here," she's said with quiet certainty. Maybe that's true. Maybe John Lennon's spirit lives on in every hopeful song, in every peaceful protest, and in the eyes of a woman who never stopped believing in his dream. Yoko Ono's life is a portrait of strength, sorrow, and undying love. It's not a story of closure, because there is none, but a story of carrying on, of turning pain into purpose. And as long as she breathes, John Lennon's legacy will never be forgotten. Thank you for watching Starloop News. If you felt this story, if it moved you, if it reminded you of the power of love and resilience, hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories from the world of music and fame, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss a beat. Until next time, keep imagining and keep believing.